Ferguson Alliance talks a lot about prosperity. So I want to hear from all the advisors, as we advise family businesses, we talk a lot about prosperity, and especially we don't just talk profit. Profit's important, we discuss profit, but we talk more about the prosperity side of things. So what does prosperity really mean to y'all as advisors?
Well, I'll start off. To me, it is the wholeness. It's a lot of times when our clients think of the word prosperity, they translate that to wealth or profits. And to me, it's all encompassing of, our relationships, our peace with the business, our freedom from it. It's our ability to have a thriving organization that isn't a burden on the owner or the leadership or management. And it reflects the goodness of our business in the communities and with our employees. That's how I kind of think about prosperous businesses.
Well, I'll add on to what Rob said. I think prosperity means different things to different people. Some people, the wealth is the most important, and that's their only goal is to, have a better income, better wealth production, where you'll find someone else, and what's really important to them and the reason they started their own business is to have the freedom to do what it is that they like to do. Maybe it's vacation, maybe it's travel, maybe it's just free time each day. And so, one person's prosperity might not be the same for someone else. And I think that's one thing that is important for us as we're working with a client to understand what is their prosperity, what is their goal, and to help them achieve that in the way that leads the company to be prosperous, but also fits in with what that business owner's definition of prosperity for themselves is as well.
I'd agree with that, Jan. In my own experience managing a family-owned business was that, that alignment and that feeling about what is going to be the financial freedom and how do they define that? And then what else do they find important in terms of driving the growth or the success of the business? So that's of course an important part, and a lot of things open up as a part of that flower opening, including the things that Rob's talked about, which include building the legacy of the business, the succession planning, investment in your own employee group, and then what contributions you're going to decide to make or can you make to the community that you work in. So all those things mixed together, and I'm sure we've all experienced different levels of all those things.
That's right, Jay. As you and Jan were talking, it came to mind where I'm working with a client right now on his succession plan. He's been in business for over 40 years and never taken a vacation. And so one of his assignments, his homework assignment, as we were working on it, was to take a vacation. And he took a week, and he came back, and the business was fine, and it worked well. I mean, the sun came up. And then the next homework assignment, a couple months later, was to take a 3-week vacation, and he was really worried and nervous about it. But his leadership team was lined up. He has good operating practices, and I just met with him, and he came back after that 3-week vacation, and his wife was with him. They're working on the succession plan together, and she reported that he only called the office 3 times in that 3-week period.
Wow.
Yeah, which was quite amazing, and he was disappointed. He said, "Yeah, every time I called, they wanted to know why I was calling." and his sales increased during that period of time. His leadership team said, "You need to go on vacation more often."
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah.
When do associates get that homework assignment?
when you're no longer an associate.
Sounds like you got like 40 more years, right?
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah. Well, since we are in the holiday season, I wanted to bring up this important question. I think this time of year, it's on everybody's minds, but How do you see philanthropy and giving as part of a family business's long-term strategy for legacy?
Well, I'll start off. I think that, one of the things that is important as far as being a good member of the community is to look for areas that you can contribute to that will, at the same time, bring forward the things that meet with the value of your own company. And so that when you're looking at an opportunity to contribute, especially around the holidays, is to advance your own values and to make certain that also to take a look at what in your employees, what values do they have and what charities might be important to them, so that they feel like they're a part of that contribution and that their input to you as far as moving forward with those philanthropic areas really take into consideration how they feel and things that are important to them as well. So that's something to take a look at.
Yeah, I agree, Jan. And research shows that it's family businesses that are the drivers of philanthropy here in our country. And I think one of the reasons is because at least our clients, that's part of their purpose. And purpose is that North Star of why we get up and do what we are doing. And philanthropy or giving back is just kind of innately built into the purpose of the company. And I want to say too, we've got a lot of clients that it's a good reminder, it's not just writing a check. It's not just the donation, it's the volunteering of hours, it's the volunteering of time to mentor others. And we have some great examples of clients that get involved in local communities here in Houston, whether it's the Houston Rodeo to raise funds for scholarships. Price, you've gotten our firm involved in a charity for diabetes. So the point being is what Jan, you said, is the giving is aligned to what is most relevant for your community and your employees.
Yeah, and I would say too, just like checking in on your employees too during this season. Is there, anything that they need, anyone that is in a particularly tough spot, making sure that you're also aware of the situations that your team is in too.
Sometimes it gets hard. When I was a general manager of an organization, we had about 250 employees, and I remember I was always getting requests to give a $25 or $100 donation to a soccer team or a baseball team, or we just had a lot of requests for things like that, and I felt like we were contributing a lot of money into the community, but it was being diluted. So to pick up on Jan's point, what we did is every year we would identify maybe 5 charitable organizations, and we would put that to vote to all of the employees. So which one of these organizations do we want to adopt for the year? And it was great. And that's what we did. And one year we adopted a park in the community. And we donated money to the city for that park. We also put in, I don't know how many man hours, hundreds of man hours in cleaning it up and landscaping and things of that sort. So we did something good for the community, but it was a community where our employees were living. And our employees, to your point earlier, Brandy, they were engaged. They felt the purpose. They knew that, wow, we can contribute more if our company is also profitable. And so they got aligned to that pretty quickly.
And I think
Nice.
to
Thank you
Rob's
for the
point, it's not always money that you can contribute. Sometimes those man hours that you contribute and those volunteer hours can end up being more valuable in the end than a financial donation. So, and where it's going, how it's being utilized, and it's fulfilling for the people who participate.
Yep, we have several clients that donate hours to the Houston Food Bank, the homeless shelters, things of that sort. think that it just is. It's not only is it a feel good, but I think it's a being good, and that's what prosperity is all about. Is how do we be good as a community and as a business, an active business in the community.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say keep it genuine. Um, yeah.
Yeah, not every organization has a budget that would allow them to make financially significant donations, and so donating their time as an employee
Hmm.
group is usually really appreciated. So, in my experience, we've done a lot of that.
That's a great point, Jay. I'm glad you brought that up. Any other advice on ways to give back other than monetary donations? What have you seen done with just helping spread awareness? Any quick ideas for family businesses maybe starting off and just want to help give back and something else other than their time?
Well, the one thing that was popping into mind when I was, maybe this isn't exactly where you're going, but another example of giving, I was sitting on a very successful board of directors for a 100-year-old family business. And one of the requirements that they had for their directors is that each director had to, they called it tithe 10% of their board fees to a charitable organization of their choice, of the director's choice. So that was a requirement to sit on their board. And the other thing that was interesting, to your point, Jay, a lot of companies don't have a budget item for giving on their budget. Well, this family was had a holding company of numerous businesses, and every business that they invested in had to have a charitable giving line on their P&L, and it had to equal up to 10% of their profit. And they also had thresholds. They had to meet certain profit thresholds. But the point being is it was full alignment from the operating companies to the board of directors. There was this sense of giving, and that was part of the values that this family had. It was their family values that they integrated into the core values of their businesses, as well as their governing board of directors. I found that a great example to get alignment, but also to give back to the community.
That's great. We'd love to hear what others are doing out there. So if you have anything to add as you're watching this, please drop it in comments and help spread some knowledge on how we could all give back to our local communities. All right, let's move into a hypothetical case study. So let's say we're advising a second generation family business that had a strong financial year, but is struggling to define what success looks like beyond the numbers. They want to strengthen their culture, deepen community impact, and prepare for leadership transition in 2026. How would you guide that conversation?
So the starting point for me would be where Brandy always starts her strategic workshops, defining the why. And I think in this hypothetical situation, the leadership has to reframe their success metrics, not to avoid the success metrics of profitability or productivity, but reframe it so that it includes things like impact, includes things like integrity or influence, and how can you measure that? And I think that would be the first place we would recommend to start.
Yeah, I want to get really clear on their why, and get a better understanding of why they're having a tough time defining what success is for them, and getting clear on the goals of the business, but also their personal goals. What are they looking to, where do they see themselves? I think that the fact that the business is successful for the year is great, but that can all change very quickly. And so thinking about their long-term why, purpose, fulfillment, It always comes back to the feelings. As much as our clients don't like to hear that and don't like to address that from time to time, it is so important to be clear and honest about how you're feeling, what you want, and allowing yourself to explore all of that and kind of maybe say out loud some of the things that you might be afraid to say out loud. Not that you're really like committing yourself to anything that you're saying, but you have to explore what it is that you want, because until you do that, your culture suffers, your business is going to struggle. You know, you might be successful here and there in certain areas, but it's going to be really hard to maintain any kind of cadence or success without being very clear on where you're going, what you want, how you're going to get there. So you got to do the soul searching.
Yeah, we have found, Brandy, that companies with strong purposes, they actually outperform over time those that don't even have a purpose statement. Jay, you talked about the business assessments that we do. That's one of the things that we find out very quickly when an entrepreneur reaches a certain point of their ability in revenue generation or profit generation. They don't have a purpose. So they get to a certain threshold that's at their capacity. But now what we're trying to do is help the business expand that capacity beyond an owner. And the only way to really do that is really understand, why is the business even existing? And then leadership becomes purposeful. They're a purposeful leader, as opposed to just a leader of transactions or a leader of profit. They're purposeful, and then that guides their decisions. And these purposeful businesses will, time and time again, over time, outperform those that are not purposeful.
I guess from my perspective, you have to start with, how much work have they done on defining their vision? I mean, as a company and a group and an owner or whatever, I mean, you know, what is it that we're doing? What's our main purpose? And then once you've got that, the alignment of everything else, yeah, you got to work on. So to me, it's hard. This is really hard stuff, and it's not easily done. It takes an awful lot of time, but it's time well spent. And I remember I joined, my second job after graduate school was with a relatively large public company for the time. And 2 years into my tenure there, they started this process all over again. It was very interesting to watch, and it was difficult for a lot of people to get comfortable with speaking their mind in that room. It started with the leadership team, and then it expanded to the second and third levels of people that were involved. And it took over a year to put the thing finally together and to publish it, make that public. So if you pull all that experience in your head together, one of the commitments, I think, like you're talking about, Rob and Brandy, is, when are you going to do that? And how do you make sure that you can renew it from time to time?
Yeah, and that renewal, I think, is, again, it's year end here, and we're talking about year end's a perfect time to be thinking about renewing that and reflecting on it, not just for the numbers' sake, but how are we doing against our purpose that we've declared?
Now, since this is second generation, do you see any friction points where maybe that their why is not aligned with the founder generation, and that causes them to feel like they're not successful?
Well, it could be. And I know in our workshops, we advise them to check their emotions at the door, back to some of the things that Brandy and Rob were saying. But I think, to your point, Bryce, it could be that they have a hesitancy to say really what they see as success, because they don't want to hurt the feelings of the first generation, or they don't want to go against what the first generation did in building the company. And so that may be a point of friction within their own mind. Whether it really would be with the first generation is to be seen. But I think you're right. It could be that's part of the hesitancy to say, yes, our success is because of how we see the prosperity and the purpose of the company versus what it was before we came along.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's very common to see between generations the definition of prosperity or even vision is different. It really is. And so one of the things that we do is we try to really teach our leaders, no matter where they are, first generation, second generation, we try to move them from being, we call it, move from being a bricklayer to an architect. In other words, move from being a doer to a builder. And if we can transition their leadership to stewardship, then the first generation feels a lot better about the second generation, that they're providing common stewardship to a common purpose versus trying to fight for their profit number or their distribution number or their credit card or their car or their office. So I think helping business owners move from transactional doing to actual strategic building and stewardship helps minimize or reduce that friction and turn that friction into collaboration.
Yeah, and I think, yes, at times we want clients to check their feelings at the door, but more like we want them to check the defensiveness of their feelings. We want to embrace people to talk about those things and to be open about understanding why. And I think that can help with the friction as well, is that if both parties come into it like trying to change the other one's mind, then the friction's likely to stay there. But like you're saying, how can you be more collaborative on that? It's tough because it's not just a business relationship either, especially when we're talking about first and second generation. There's a whole other aspect to it.
Care to expand?
It's really challenging to have hard conversations in the business sense with your family and then go to a birthday party. And you feel so much internal conflict because you want to be present and excited with your family, but you're still irked about what you talked about yesterday while you were at work. And it's probably one of the biggest points of contention and challenge that we, from a personal standpoint, help clients through. It can be very, very tough.
And I think that's why we spend so much time on getting the family members united around a common purpose and a common vision. Because once their business philosophy is aligned and once their purpose and vision is aligned, they're then united. And then that becomes the standard for making decisions. It becomes the standard for designing your governance processes. It becomes the standard of how you're going to manage people or how you're going to build your culture. I mean, once that, it doesn't mean you're going to always agree, and it doesn't mean your emotions are not going to get heated, right? But you have a common ground you can come back to and say, okay, well, I don't agree with your approach to this initiative, but I understand that you're trying to move us forward to achieving our long-term purpose. So that's the challenge, that's the difficulty, and it's also maturity in leadership, right? Managers have to mature into leaders, and leaders have to mature into stewards.
And I think some of that difficulty in a family-owned business into getting to where Rob's talking about is sometimes it's hard for that parent to see that child of theirs as the steward. Although maybe they're doing an excellent job, it's that separation is what we have to help them get to, is to see that individual as a good steward of the company and not your kid. That's got to be a tough adjustment for some people, and so that's what we try to help them get to.
Well, Thank you for everybody's input, advice, wisdom on this Inside the Issue.